just like the United States. It was just a series of a confederation. Each area and each tribe, Menashe here, tribe of Dan here, tribe of Judah down here. Each tribe had their own territory, and each tribe was concerned with their own issues. They were all confronted with the same kind of problems, and sometimes they would make alliances with each other to confront the enemies that constantly were attacking them. And each one of the tribes also was facing their own problems, and each time they had a judge or a leader that came forward from that particular tribe and to solve the problem. The interesting thing about it is that the Israelites were not the only ones separated like these by these alliances. The Canaanites also. It wasn't one nation, it was just a bunch of city-states that joined together to form alliances, either for protection or to fight against each other. And the Philistines, who had just come in, who had conquered the coast, we're going to hear a lot about the Philistines because they're going to be the major players here and the major enemy of Israelites, and threatened actually Israel's existence. Even when they came in, it was also a bunch of cities-states that they built up. In 5 important cities, Gat, where Goliath was born, Gaza, the city of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron. These are 5 major cities that were Philistines. And then they moved up also. They were terrific warriors, and moved up as far as Tel Aviv, and even higher as far as Akko, all along the coast. And then they started to threaten where most of the Israelites lived, were toward the mountainous areas. They started to move toward the east and threatened to overcome the Israelites. That's how dangerous they really were. And I asked myself a question: how come there was nobody could form a United States, a United Nation? And then once I lived in Israel, I could understand why. Israel is a small country, yet it's so unusual by its geography. There are mountains and hills and valleys that separate things. There's a desert, and the whole Negev, and then there's the Judean desert, which is not a regular desert. It's a unique kind of a desert that when the clouds form and they rise, they try to rise up the mountain. They get tired. They drop the rain, and then the other side of the mountain, they're not holding any rain anymore. Gets not enough rain, so you have the Judean desert, which is not part of the geographic desert. It's a unique desert. So Israel has its own desert, its own mountains. It has the Golan is mostly volcanic area. In fact, when I took my home insurance out here, the guy said, you better put a little thing in there in case there's a volcano, in case there's an eruption of some sort. So they're expecting something like that to happen, because it's on the rift, on the African-Syrian rift. It gives us the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea. So you go from high mountains to the lowest point on Earth, all within 30 minutes. You go from beautiful grass and trees, and in biblical times, you had lions and all kinds of animals, jungle area. In 15 minutes, I'm in the desert. I don't have to take a plane anywhere. I have this, and then if I want to go to the beach, another 20 minutes, I can be down the coast of the Mediterranean, all in this little land, and I can travel from north to south in 7 hours. I've done the whole land of Israel. By car. So in this small land, you've got such a variety. There are over 2,000 types of plants in Israel. It's the lowest point for vegetation from the north, meeting in Israel. It's the highest point for vegetation from the south, meaning in Israel, and they all meet there in the middle. So you have all kinds of plants. You've got all kinds of rocks and geological formations, all in here. You have the Machtesh Ramon, which is a deep cavern in the Earth's crust. And then there's migration of birds. My little balcony outside, especially this time of year, is all for the bird do. You get 500 million birds migrating one way or another. Either they're coming from the north to the south, or south to the north. Israel is a major migration route for the birds. And in this Zechula Valley, there are hundreds and thousands of birds that meet there. And people come from all over the world, bird watchers, to come in to see that. And so as a result of all that, you can understand when you live in ancient times, in biblical times, you don't have automobiles, you don't have cars. How do you get from over a mountain from one area to another area? It's a big climb. So what happens is you're pretty much enclosed. So there's no, you can form your own little city state, and that's yours. And you have a mountain that's separating you from the next one, and valleys and so on. So you can understand why it was very difficult to form a national state. But one thing, though, the Israelites did have that united them, and that was a shared history and also a shared religion. And they had a central place to come for worship. Now, worship is not to go to a synagogue. There's no such thing as synagogues then. They didn't exist. People prayed, they prayed on their own, spontaneously or so on, but they came to worship at a central place before the temple was built, before we had Jerusalem, to a place called Shiloh, which, and there they had the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which the Israelites set up while they were going through the desert. And when they came to Eretz Yisrael, they set up this tabernacle, and they had the ark that contained the tablets of the Torah that Moses received as the central part. And all this thing was just a bunch of curtains setting off an area, and in the middle was another bunch, was a tent, and inside that tent had two parts to it. One, they had a menorah, they had the showbread and a table, and then another part of the tent housed the ark, which is the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies. That was it, very simple. And in front of this tent was an altar where people brought their sacrifices. That's how people came to pray. They came to worship, offer to God their sacrifices. And most of the sacrifices were eaten, by the way, by the families who brought those sacrifices, except for one or two, which is burnt entirely on the altar. So people came to this place of Shiloh. In about the year 10,050 BCE, the Philistines moved their way toward the east, and there was a war in a place called Ebenezer. I think in Atlanta they have the Ebenezer Church, or Martin Luther King, named after this battle. And there they were able to defeat the Israelites and capture the ark, trash and destroy and totally burn down Shiloh. Now there was no, and then they took the ark. What happened then was, according to the sages, from that point on until the temple was built in Jerusalem, there was no longer a central place. Anybody could build their own particular private altar for themselves and do their worship service at that altar instead of having to come to a central place, which you can understand would create, which in the end would create more separation. Rather, now the main source of a tabernacle with the ark in it is gone. What happened to that ark is interesting question. You read it in the book of Samuel. What happened to the ark? The Philistines brought the ark to their cities, and it all of a sudden, all kinds of diseases happened and so on. They said, we got to get rid of this thing. And so they sent it back. It got back to the Israelites, and it was deposited in a place called Kiryat Yearim, which is not far out of Yerushalayim, about 10 minutes from here. And the ark was stayed there for about 20 years. No one seemed to want to get it back. According to the sages, the ark went into exile in order to save the fact that the Jews deserved to get exiled because of their behavior and immoral behavior, which led, from the Jewish perspective, from the Israelite perspective, for their loss of the tabernacle, the destruction of Shiloh. And Eli, who was the main leader at Shiloh, was 98 years old when he learned that the Israelites had been defeated and his sons were killed in that war, and that the ark was taken. He just had a heart attack, keeled over, and died. In the next 20 years, the one who wasn't the tabernacle anymore, it wasn't the ark anymore, but it was an individual called Samuel, who became the main leader and the one person whom everybody, all the tribes, both respected and loved and admired and followed. He became, in a sense, the glue that held the tribes together. And indeed, when the next war came with the Philistines at that same place in the Ebenezer, he was able to gather them all to fight together, and they were able to defeat, at that point, the Philistines, who didn't bother them for the next 10, 20 years until Saul became the king. That's the background. But there's one other point that I wanted to make with you, to think about. All the time, there was trouble always between the Israelites and the Canaanites and God. And we see a pattern developing. What was the pattern? Things were okay. And suddenly the Israelites started to copy the practices and the ways of the Canaanites, and the idolatry and their behavior. And then God left his presence, and the Israelites were attacked, whichever tribe it may be, were taken over, had to pay tribute, were oppressed, until a leader came and led them to repent, and God forgave them. God's always forgiving us, and God forgave them, and it was peaceful for a bunch of years, and the cycle repeated itself. And I asked myself, were they so stupid they couldn't get it the first time? What's going on here? What is it about these Canaanites that's so attractive? So I saw, when I was reading Leon Uris's book on the source, and he has a wonderful description. And then when I saw some of the sites here, I got the picture, I think. The Canaanites had a lot of interesting things. It was technologically advanced society. They had a high culture. And the Israelites, when they came in, these were desert people, they came in, what did they know about farming? What do they know? I mean, they had to come in, they got land, but they weren't, how do they know about terrace farming? How do they know about how do you save water, and how do you collect water, and how do you find water? How do they know about building houses? Even Solomon himself, when he built the temple, doesn't use Jewish sources. He calls Hiram, a Phoenician, who was a Canaanite. The Canaanites weren't just one group, with different types of groups together. He calls Hiram the Phoenician to send him, Canaanites to send him engineers and people to help him build and design the temple. It wasn't done, and it doesn't work from inside. white. The Philistines had iron. The Jews had no iron. If they wanted to buy a sickle or a plow, they would have to go to Gaza or someone where they had people there who knew how to work with iron to sharpen them and give them the tools. So they go home. So, but the Canaanites are pretty advanced. How far were they advanced? The alphabet. Where do you think the alphabet came from? I'm sitting in the Israel Museum. There's a section there for the development of the alphabets. Before you had hieroglyphics, you had all other kinds of stuff. It was the Canaanites who developed the alphabet, and the Jews and the Israelites used that alphabet for Hebrew. And I had a what do you call it, a slide to show you that in a place called Gezer, they found one of the earliest written on a stone area, a description of the agricultural season in ancient Hebrew. Ancient Hebrew was based on the alphabet of the Canaanites. That's how they learned to use the alphabet, rather like the Chinese don't have an alphabet. They have signs for sounds. And that's what hieroglyphics also tried to do. But they were smart. They developed the alphabet. They also, there is a place in the south, it's called Tel Arad, which has a village, 3500 BCE, the oldest developed village in history. And it was a Canaanite village. And there they have the houses. And it's interesting, the houses that they have, before the Israelites even were there, are what are called 4-room houses, which became the typical style for Israel houses. All archaeologists can always find where there's an Israelite settlement by the houses, if it's a 4-room house. What was a 4-room house? They learned that from the Canaanites. It was two side areas, a middle area and 2 side areas. The one side area was for sleeping into rooms. Another extreme was for the animals to be kept. And the middle one is for all your daily activities. And in the front was a little courtyard where you planted stuff for food. And that became the typical Israelite 4-room house. Where they get it from? The Canaanites. Where they get the alphabet from? The Canaanites. The Hebrew alphabet changed in the 6th century BCE, but till the 6th century BCE, it was the alphabet of the Canaanites that we learned. But there was a negative part to it. And the negative part to it was these were very, very mean people, immoral people. The aristocracy was very oppressive. That there was a lot of licentiousness in the whole culture. And they had exuberant, extravagant festivals that were sexually attractive and exciting and so on. So given all that, in a way you can understand what the attraction was that the Israelites had for some of the Canaanite practices. They had what they had, and they knew what the Israelites didn't know yet. They had to learn from them. And what happens then, once those kinds of interactions come in, you begin to integrate a little bit and to assimilate a little bit into them. The Philistines themselves, who came in 1050 BCE, also conquered the Canaanite cities, but Canaanite culture conquered them. And the way they know that is from the pottery. The Canaanites had a special way of coloring pottery, and the Philistines adopted that. And eventually, the Philistines pretty much integrated into Canaanite society and disappeared altogether after they were finally defeated by David later on, and they were no longer a problem. So you could see that the issue of being attracted to what a technologically developed country, civilization, and so on, affected Jews as well. And it's a theme that repeats itself. Look at the high assimilation we have in the United States of Jews. What's the attraction? Attraction is all the things that America has to offer that you don't have to be Jewish for. And so you have those same kinds of attractions pulling the Israelites, and it created all kinds of problems and issues in terms of even some intermarriage and so on, but creeping in of the worship of idolatry into the Israelite home, and that became a real issue and a real problem, affecting how God felt and how and what happened to Israel as well in terms of their special role and special place. In terms of Samuel, I just wanted to say on Friday night, if you go to the synagogue, and one of the prayers that you read in Kabbalat Shabbat, Psalm 99, just to point out what a special person he was, there you'll see, it says, Moshe, Aaron, Shmuel called out to God, and God answered them. They compare Samuel to Moses and Aaron. And in fact, there's a midrash that says that Samuel may have been even greater than them. Why? Because like Moses, he was a judge and a fair one. And like Aaron, though, he also knew how to deal with people, how to make people feel good, how to encourage people, how to bring people together, how to make peace. So that Samuel united both of these characteristics and qualities and found his way into the book of Psalms, which we recite even on Friday night. You'll take a look at it. The problem, though, as Samuel got old, and his sons were no Samuels. The Bible only seems to hint that they may have been, maybe collecting money on the side or things that were not as respected as Samuel was. And so the elders of the tribes, though, had a real big problem now. That all the tribes are being tested and pressured by the Philistines, who are slowly moving and slowly capturing most of the area. And they had to be stopped. They finally realized the only way they could do it is to have a central authority. And in those days, every city-state had a central authority as a king. And they asked Samuel to go find them a king and appoint a king so that he could bring them all together, and especially to bring them together to be able to fight the Philistines. The only way. Samuel first opposed it. He said, if you have a king, just understand, a king, if he wants something, he'll get it. He takes it. He doesn't ask. If a king wants to have an army, he doesn't pay the people in the army. He just enlists you into the army. If he needs money for anything, guess what? He's going to tax you. And he taxes you as much as he wants. He has absolute authority. But they said, look, we're talking about life and death here. We want a king. And so Samuel considers, he prays to God. God says, yeah, give it to him. Let them have a king. And he says, I want you to go to this and this place, and there you will find a king. All right. So Samuel goes there. Meantime, we're introduced to a young man from the tribe of Benjamin who's looking for a bunch of strayed donkeys. And he happens to come to where Samuel was having a meeting with people and so on. And as he approaches, God says, he's the king of Israel. He's going to be the king of Israel. Why is he the king? And then let me read to you here. It says, Saul was remarkably handsome. When women looked at him, they chalished. They just couldn't get their eyes off of him. He was remarkably handsome. He was tall, physically fit, and so on. And then the Talmud builds him up, and he was a tzaddik, a righteous person. He was a great Torah scholar. He was exceedingly humble. And you could ask the question, if he has all these great qualities, what happened to him later on? We'll see in a moment. But that he was humble is known. But finally, Samuel introduces him to the people as a king. As a king, ready to anoint him. He says, and now I want you to see who your king is. Where is he? I says, he's hiding behind the baggage. He says, what's he doing behind the baggage? He's going to be the king. Get him out of there. Bring him up here. So he comes, they get him, and he comes, and so on. As soon as everybody sees him, oh my, he looks like the king. He looks like a king. And Samuel anoints him. And at that moment, once he's anointed, something happens to him. He truly becomes a king. He truly becomes a leader. And you ask yourself a question, he didn't, when you first met him, he didn't seem to be like someone who's going to be a king and a great warrior and great savior. He's, a nice guy, a farmer. He just lost a couple of donkeys, and he's trying to find them, looking around for them. A simple man. How does he become a king? Evidently, he had it within him. He had to be called forth. And it just seems to me that the Torah is trying to give us a lesson here, that simple people, anybody has powers within them that if someone else can bring it out of them, these powers are seen. And it reminds me of the Hasidic Rebbe's. And I once talked to one of them. I said, how is it that you're able to meet the Hasidim, your Hasidim, and understand them? And he says, I tell you the truth. He said, I wasn't born this way. But what happens is my Hasidim bring it out of me. When they put their trust in me, so much faith in me, and and so on, there are things that come out of me that normally would not come out of. I'm drawn out. Something comes out of the neshama, which I don't know where it comes from. I do know, he said, it comes from them, from the trust that they put in me, for the faith that they put in me. So everybody can bring out something good in someone else if they're able to look at their good part, at their strengths, and emphasize that. You have such an influence. So maybe in Judaism, greeting is such an important part. To greet someone is to say you're important. When you just pass someone by, let's say someone, just pass them by, you're saying to them, you're not anything, you're worthless. I don't even have to stop for you. But when you stop to greet someone with a smile and so on, what you're doing, you've said to somebody else, you're an important person. You have some meaning. You have stature. I recognize you. Once you do that, it brings out something in that other person as well. So in a sense, Saul, maybe when he was looking for his donkeys, he was also looking for himself. Because once he's anointed, he's told, don't worry about the donkeys anymore. They have been found. It's interesting. They've already been found. So Saul now becomes the king. And indeed, this simple farmer became a feared warrior. His whole time as a king was fighting all the time, fighting against the Philistines until the end. They defeated him at the Mount Gilboa. Him and his 3 sons all died there in a battle. But he basically saved the Israelites from being overrun by the Philistines. At the same time, and I have so much trouble with this, maybe some of you can help me. At the same time, he defeated the Amalekites. Amalekites were traditional enemies. He defeated them, and the Moabites. He defeated all the enemies of the Israelites, including the Philistines, until that last battle. And what he conquered the Amalekites, and he took the king of Amalek. Agag was his name, and he allowed him. He felt sorry for him, so he allowed him to live. And Samuel came, and he said to him, why are you letting him live? He's your enemy. He's the arch enemy. An arch enemy. He's just going to let him live another day just to kill you. You can't show mercy. And the commentaries say, I quote, Saul substituted his own mercy for the apparent harshness of the commandment, which is to wipe out Amalek. We say that on Purim. But as history would show, his mercy turned out to be cruelty in disguise. Why? Because the Amalek king, whom he pitied, lived long enough before Samuel himself killed him, lived long enough to sire an offspring. And guess who that offspring was? Haman. That offspring was Haman, the man who attempted genocide against the Jewish people. He was a descendant of King Agag. So ultimately, the merciful, showing mercy, can be short-sighted, and sometimes compassion, as the Talmud says, compassion for the cruel could lead the cruel to destroy the compassionate. So in any case, because of that, Samuel said, you'll finish up your days as a king, but you will not be a dynasty. And from then on, Saul was living in depression. We don't know what happened to him. David was brought in to help soothe him by playing the harp and singing to him. And afterwards, when Saul suspected that David might replace him, Saul tried to kill him several times. Thank God for Saul's son Jonathan, who had such a close relationship to David that his love for David was greater than his own need to become the next king. He helped to save David as well. But my question is, what happened to him? How did he get this way? All right, so you won't have a dynasty. You were king, you were picked. Look at the change that happened to you, and now what happened? What happened to you? So I don't know how to answer all of this. All I can try, make myself a chart. Saul, king. When he was Saul, he was humble. When he started out, he was a beloved. He was merciful. He was kind. He became a warrior, a military man. Now that he's king, he becomes a nutcase. What happened? He's depressed. what is going on with him? I think Shakespeare, King Lear, Shakespeare captures the storm of his life. And then it just came to me, maybe you have other thoughts, that once he became a king, he lost soul. Do you know what I'm saying? Being the king and having the power, sometimes power can corrupt. Having the power and the influence and having success, and maybe even having fought so many times and having been such a successful warrior, the Philistines hated him. When after they found his body, they cut off his head and they hung him up in Beit Shan on the wall so everybody could see. And they went back and people rejoiced and were singing at parties, and flares were going up and so on. They finally got rid of Saul, the dreaded enemy. I said, once he became this, I think he lost part of who he was. And at that point, the only thing that mattered was being the king. And he lost being Saul. And maybe that's what happened to him. Maybe that's what happens to a lot of people. We lose who we were. We lose or we forget who we are or who we were at one time. That we're living now in a different age, in a different place, in a different time. We forget who we were when we were younger. We forget that, and others do forget. I remember a woman in a nursing home once turned to the nurse and she said, "Look at me, nurse. I'm almost 100 years old. I think you forget the way you're treating me. I'm just a body here. I'm an old person, not so important anymore. You forget I was young once, and I danced and I sang. And I had dreams, and I was married, and I had children. I had all these things, and that's also me. And I want you to look at who I am, me, not who you see now, but who I am in totality, in my whole person. I have all these things that are part of me. That's me. I think that, in a sense, Saul, as king, lost all that. He was just king, and he's doing everything he could, even to the point of going crazy about it, to try to stay and keep who he was now as a king. He forgot his other part of himself. And that's how I looked at Saul. Anyway, Samuel is told, now it's time to appoint a new king. And he goes, and he's told to go to Bethlehem. And he goes to Bethlehem, and there to the house of Jesse. And he says, in this house you will find the next king. So he comes and he says to Jesse, I want to meet your sons. Oh, he meets the first one. He's tall, he's handsome, he's strong. And Samuel says to himself, there's the king. And God says, no. You look at the outside. I look at the heart. He's not the king. Okay, the second son, same thing. Third son, fourth, fifth. So none of them. So he says, do you have any more? He says, yeah, I have one more son. He's out in the field. He's a shepherd boy over there. He's a redhead. Seemed to be, don't say somebody's redhead, you have a sense he's probably a little mischievous and so on. He comes in, nothing like his brothers and so on. And God says to him, he's the one. He's the one I want you to anoint. He'll be the next king of Israel. So Samuel says, okay, God, I guess you know what you're doing. So he anoints David, and David will become the next king of Israel. Before he does that, he has to go through all kinds of stuff because Saul is trying to kill him. As long as Saul is alive, he was trying to kill David. And David always escaped from him. And there were 2 times in En-Gedi, in place of En-Gedi, where Saul was chasing David. He had a report he was there with his soldiers, and they camped out for the night. And David was able to sneak up on him while he was sleeping in a cave and cut the bottom of his hem go back to where he was, and from the mountain talk to Saul. He says, look, I could have killed you last night. I don't know what kind of guards you have. I don't know what kind of security you have. I could have killed you last night, but I don't want to kill you. I don't know. I understand why you want it. Why? And Saul said, oh, and Saul would say, oh yeah, you really could have done it. You said you could have killed me. And now I know you're really loyal to me. And he apologized and so on. He went back, didn't help. Next day, the king he was Saul for a night. The next day, the king came back. And again, he tried to just kill David. But after Saul is killed in Gilboa, David delivers a eulogy. Can you imagine? And these are his words. O splendor of Israel, upon your heights lie the slain. That's the heights of Gilboa, the mountain of Gilboa. How have the mighty fallen? Do not tell it in Gath. Gath is where the Philistine capital. Don't tell them. Do not spread the tidings in the streets of Ashkelon. Again, in Ashkelon, the Philistine capital. Lest the Philistine girls go out and rejoice. Lest their daughters go out in jubilation. O mountains of Gilboa, let neither dew nor rain be upon you, nor fields of bounty. This part of his prayer didn't come true because the Gilboa has the most beautiful irises in the spring in March. The Gilboa irises are very famous. But anyway, he cursed the mountain. There should be no rain, no dew, and he shouldn't grow anything. And then he continues, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their lifetimes and in their deaths, not parted. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? Jonathan slain upon the heights. I'm distressed over you, my brother Jonathan. Your love was more wondrous to me than even the love of women. How have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war gone to waste? So you see, it brings out the character of David, the man who tried to kill him, who caused him so much pain and so much harm. And still, David still respected him for who he was and what he was. David then becomes king, but he's not accepted yet. He's accepted by the Judeans, tribe of Judah, but not by the northern tribes. They're still connected to Saul and his family and his son Ishbosheth. And so David is king in Hebron for 7 years, but eventually this fellow Abner, who was the military leader, Ishbosheth feared him terribly, and all the northern Israel tribes respected him, decided that David should be king of all of Israel. And he came to make a treaty with him. And that led David to become the full king. David then decides he has to find a new capital. What does he do? There's this little city. It's a Jebusite city. The Jebusites were Canaanites. A Jebusite city surrounded by a very strong wall, no way to get into it, surrounded by mountains, you can't get in it, surrounded by valleys, the Kidron Valley on one side, the valley of Hinnom on the other side, and then there was another third valley called the Transversal Valley on the other side. So there are valleys in between, walls on this top. The people had built a canal, which is then later emulated by Hezekiah, to bring the water supply from the Gihon, the source of water. A source of water was very important to any city that had to be built. And they built a canal that brought the water from the Gihon spring, which is an underground spring that pops up at that point, and directed the water through this canal into this city, then they cover it up so that enemies couldn't find where the source of water is. And people from inside the city could then go and then lower their pails and get the water that they need. And he decided he wants to conquer this particular area, this particular state, to make his capital. Why? Because none of the tribes owned it. It's neutral, like Washington, D.C. See, David was not only a wonderful warrior, he also was a very astute politician. If I pick this place, and it doesn't belong to any tribe, so no tribe can say, I'm better than you. Everybody could be part of it. And second of all, it was on a good location too, because some of the roads that passed from east to west would pass through not far from where Jerusalem was. So, but the question was, how do you go conquer the city? And to this day, nobody knows how they conquered the city. It was impregnable. But somehow, the theory is that his commander of his troops, Job, found this water tunnel, a shaft that directed the water from Gihon into a pool of water, and maybe he and a bunch of soldiers got in through there and got into the city and so on. But nobody knows. But in any case, he conquers the city. He makes that his home, and that is the beginning of Jerusalem, not where the old city is. The city of David is the beginning of the story of Jerusalem. David built himself a palace, and then he's brilliant too. He's going to bring the ark back, and he goes and buys at the top of the hill. Here he's at the bottom. Think of it this way: the city of David here, and here the top of the hill is here, Mount Moriah, where, according to tradition, Abraham brings Isaac for the sacrifice. According to the Muslim tradition, interesting enough, there's a rock there where Muhammad went up to heaven to receive information from Gabriel as to how Muslims should pray. And he meets Moses and Jesus there and so on. And he comes down and he meets Gabriel again in another part where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stands, which is the third holiest place for Muslims. Al-Aqsa really means the furthest mosque. The most holy mosques are Mecca and Medina, and then Al-Aqsa. For Jews, of course, the Temple Mount Moriah is the most important place, number one. Anyway, he decides he's going to bring the ark back, and he wants to bring the ark, put it into and he buys a piece of land atop of this Mount Moriah. He buys a piece of land, pays 50 shekels for it, and plus a cow, and he sets up a tent there. He goes to Kiryat Yearim, where the ark is. He gets the ark, restores it, and brings it to this place, puts it into this temple. That will become then the central place of worship. So you see what he's done? He's created a political capital. He's created a religious capital as well, and he built himself a palace, which they think they have uncovered and found. He built himself a palace, and he's also leading. He creates an empire, conquers most of the land of Israel, defeats the Philistines once and for all. After he defeats them, they never come back again. You never hear from them again, except their name lives on. You know how the name lives on? The Philistines. What is Israel? What was the land of Israel called? Palestine. Palestine is not from Palestinians. Palestine is a name that Hadrian gives to the area after destroying the Bar Kokhba rebellion. He gives the name to the area Palestina after the Philistines, and there's no such thing as Palestinians. And he calls it Palestina, and from that you get Philistines, And then from the Philistines get Palestina in Latin, and then from Palestina you get the Palestine. And then eventually, when Bedouins come in to settle in Israel, they call themselves Palestinians. But that's a different story. That's going to take us hundreds of years later. In any case, David, look, he wasn't a perfect man. You know, he committed adultery with Bathsheba. He was a hardened warrior, a good warrior. But his great strength was that if he made a mistake and if it was wrong, and if sometimes kings, people of power, feel that they own everything. So sometimes the purpose of the prophet was to put the king in his place. And Nathan, who was the prophet, was always at the side of David. Even when he committed the adultery, he came and basically chewed him out. And David accepted him, and he was repentant for it. So his great strength also was that if he did something wrong, he could accept the criticism, accept it. In addition to that, he could try to do something about it. His heart was truly broken for what had happened. And in addition to that, besides being a warrior, he was a poet. So many of the Psalms that we have were written by David, King David himself. So that gives him this special reputation. He restored the kingdom of Israel. He brought the Israelites together as one nation. He created a special city, Jerusalem, a special capital. He started to build a central place of worship, which he wasn't able to complete because God said to him, you live by the sword, and I don't want you to build me my house. Can't be built by someone who lived by the sword. But his son Solomon was able to complete it. And so Solomon completes David's dream, and he builds on this mount on top of his. This would be the city of David on the top of the mountain. The mount. He builds a temple, and they fill it in a little bit so that it would be straight. Create a wall around it. That wall later on, part of that wall become the Western Wall, the Kotel that we revere so much. But it's really, there's no holiness to it in and of itself. It's just a retaining wall. It keeps so that the area would be flattened out instead of being hilly. You got to flatten it out. You got to straighten it out this way and this way, by filling it in with earth, and then you build a wall around it to keep it that way. And that wall is a retaining wall, actually. That place then becomes holy for three religions, and the war continues on against it. It's holy to the Muslims, but it's really, as said, the holiest place for them on that mount, on the Temple Mount, is Al-Aqsa. You always hear them crying about Al-Aqsa, but it really is the third holiest place for them. Mecca and Medina is the place they turn to for prayer. That's where they have to do the Hajj to it. They have to do a pilgrimage there. That's the place. But it's become a tradition that it's a holy place for them. And we'll see when we study the Arab period why. And then Christians, interestingly enough, have nothing at the temple that's important for them. And when the Christians ruled Israel, the Byzantines, and Crusaders even, the Temple Mount was a garbage dump on purpose to show that the Jews were now relegated to garbage. And for us, of course, it's the holy site as well. So for the Christians, the holy site is the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That really is the holiest place because that, according to the New Testament, as is where Jesus was crucified. He died there, taken down, buried there on Friday afternoon before Shabbos. He was a Jew, a total Jew. And then Sunday, they found the grave empty and so on. The resurrection occurred at the top of Mount of Olives. There's a church there, which is now a mosque, where they say the resurrection occurred. After he got out of the grave, he went there, whatever. Now that's just Israel. But our story really doesn't end there. Maybe for tonight it will, because after Solomon, wise Solomon, maybe he wasn't so wise after all, because after Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam then becomes king, and he goes to the city of Shechem to be anointed because he wants to unite once again Judah with the northern Israel tribe. And the people there say to him, one thing, you and your father taxed us so much, we can't afford it anymore. You have to agree to reduce the burden. You have to agree to reduce the burden. King Solomon had maybe 80,000 servants around him. He didn't pay them. When he called them, they had to come. When they asked Rehoboam what he would do, he had advisors. The old advisors said to him, listen to them. And he had a bunch of new advisors who knew better, and they said, don't listen to them. You just tell them, not only will you keep what you have, but you're going to even increase it. You're going to teach them a lesson. You're in charge, not them. So the lesson was, this fellow Jeroboam, who came back from Egypt, led a revolt, and as a result, Israel was split once again between the northern tribes and the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah had the dynasty of David, and the northern Israel tribes then had different kings throughout, and Israel was split once again. And we'll end our story there and continue on next week. I hope I can have some pictures. I have to learn how to do that. Sorry. Any questions? Anyone have? Unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Rabbi. It was great.
Okay,
That was really good, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rabbi.
I agree.
Even without the pictures, Rabbi, you made the pictures come alive.
It's nicer with the pictures. You can see these things. It's better.
You did a great job. That was
Thank you.
Rabbi,
a lot to think about. A lot to think about.
Rabbi, can
So,
you give us?
have a good week.
I'm sorry.
What is the,
Tell me who you are. Tell me who you are.
Hal and
Me?
Lisa, thank you, and that was Shirley.
Oh, okay.
hi, Rabbi. This is Sandy Vinnick.
Yeah.
In the story with Saul and Jonathan and David, Jonathan shot an arrow. What was the significance of that? I mean, that for David to come forth or to stay away or what? I don't remember that.
Oh, the story. Well, we read that story on for around Rosh Chodesh time and so on. Saul called all of his advisors and so on for a Rosh Chodesh meal.
Right.
And in those times, Rosh Chodesh was celebrated as a festival, and he called them together for a festival meal. And he asked, and David and Jonathan made a plan. He said, David said, Jonathan, look, can you do me a favor? I don't know what your father's intent is here. So could we do this? Could you go and just, your father will notice I'm missing, and just tell him I had to go to visit my family in Bethlehem. And that's why I couldn't be there. So and if you find that he gets angry and so on, and threatens and so on, you'll know he really has an intent to kill me at this festival meal. So the deal is you'll come out and with your servant, and you'll shoot an arrow. If it goes past, and if you tell the servant it's past that place over there, that'll be a sign for me to run away. Indeed, Saul wants to kill him. If he say to his servant, it's a little closer to me, then I'll know that it's okay. So Jonathan then goes back to the festival meal, and Saul says, Where's your friend David? He says, he's not here, Saul. So he gets so angry, as I know, he says, you, Jonathan, you're his friend. You're against me. He takes a spear and basically throws it at his own son, misses him, and out of anger and so on, he says, you defy me. You're against me. You chose David over me, and so on. And Jonathan says, tries to calm him down. No, I don't. I'm using someone. So at the end of this film, he goes out and he has the boy shoot the arrow. He says, it's past that rock. And David was hiding there, and that gave him the sign they had to flee. That's the story with the arrow.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Sure.
Rabbi, what was
Rabbi, I have a question. This is Rob Epstein. The story of David as a young man felling the nemesis Goliath with the new technology of the slingshot, and later on David becoming a national hero. Didn't that happen before he was king? Wasn't he already venerated?
Oh yes, it happened before. I didn't go into it. Yeah, usually what happens is when people visit Israel, I understand. They're brought to the it's called the Ela Valley, where this all happened, near the city of God, and Goliath was born there, and he's a slingshot and so on. And they tell the people, go home, take a pebble from here, and when you go back to the States, wherever it is, tell them this is the pebble that David used to kill Goliath. So make you, everyone will say, whoa, my gosh, yeah. So yeah, that happened way before. Yes.
But he was already a known quantity. He was already a national hero.
At that time, he became, but this is the beginning of the jealousy that Saul started to develop. And not only that, but in order to he and Saul's daughter Micha fell in love, and he wanted to marry her. And Saul said, I can only marry her if you bring me 100 foreskins of Philistines. And he went out and in a battle, in a war, killed 100 Philistines. And so Saul said, well, okay, you can marry her,
Rabbi, this is Steve Seidman. That story makes me wonder. The slingshot, the rest of what you just said, is it sort of like the cherry tree and the dollar being thrown across the Potomac? Was preliminary good press for David?
No, I don't think so. Don't forget, the Israelites did not have fancy the Philistines. One of the reasons they're able to succeed so well is they had iron, okay, and with the iron they were able to make shields and so on, and chariots. The Israelites were simple farmers, so they had to use bow and arrow in their wars, and slingshots. Slingshots were a powerful force. And so this is David. David used it. Yeah. We're told that David even slew a lion while he was being a shepherd. Yeah, if you know how to use a slingshot properly, you can cause a lot of damage. And David aimed perfectly right into his head, between his eyes,
Thank you, Rabbi. And also thank you for that earlier video that you suggested we watch before this lesson. That was a fascinating piece.
Oh, good. If I find more, I'll send it. Maybe that'll be the trick.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen that before and I love to see it again and again. It's just so great.
Well,
Rabbi, this is Kathy Siegel. I actually have a question for you.
yeah, Kathy, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling well.
How are your kids doing? Okay.
Yeah, Paula and her husband and their son have been living with us this summer together.
I'm sorry, where?
My daughter Paula and her husband and son have been living here this summer, so they could leave New York for the summer. So
They're living with her.
it's fun. But I actually have a question, and it's about power corrupting. And I've been wondering, maybe if your whole job,
Yeah, we're losing you. We're losing you. It's about what?
You're
Power?
in and out, Kathy.
that if your job is to fight wars, and that was the job of Saul, and that maybe that is what's corrupting, that you become so entrenched in the idea of you and the enemy that you forget your own humanity.
Uh-huh.
That,
But David also was entrenched in war. He was quite a warrior all of his life. He had a fight.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But you say that Solomon
And don't forget,
gets to-
war was not like war today. I mean, they didn't fight in the rainy season. It's too muddy, you know. And get wet and so on. So in the middle of the summer, it gets too hot.
Yes.
So they went to vacation before they
Spring will have a
continued.
little more.
So fighting wars was not like we know today, It was a whole different way of doing it. So and plus, if it seemed to be fighting seemed to be a way of life for these people.
It is.
They can constantly how to defend themselves and so against, and then during harvest season, that was a big time for war because
What's going on with areas?
the cities and so on that lived in the drier areas who didn't have good agriculture knew when the harvest season was in Israel, which has very good soil, and so that's when they would come and attack for food. Money wasn't important. It's food that you want. And you want tribute being paid. You want farmers to give you a percentage of their produce. So, but although you make a point, that could have also been a factor. That could also have been a factor. Yeah. That's
You had to unmute to say.
fighting and killing people could really, can really dissipate your whole personality also, I would imagine.
I would think that, that several times, even Moses can't enter into the land of Israel. And maybe,
I'm sorry, I don't hear what?
I was thinking that even when Moses can't enter the land of Israel, maybe the type of rule that he had to exert also took away from his view of peace. And maybe there is some separation between what.
Can you get closer to the mic? Because I don't.
You keep going in and out, Kathy.
I'm sorry, I'll get really close. I was thinking that even like Moses, who has to lead the people during a time of fighting and wandering and loses maybe the proper view of peace, and maybe there is some loss of vision for anyone who is so focused and so on battling and can't and loses the big picture and loses that sort of how to go forward in peace view. I don't know. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Although Moses was not really the warrior. Joshua was, and Moses was really more like the lawgiver. And you can see from the whole book of Deuteronomy, which we're reading now, his farewell address to his people is really all about how they should live and so on. So him not coming to the land of Israel maybe is a message in there too, that we think life is one of, happy endings. Everything you do. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the good life is really the unfinished symphony, as opposed to a symphony that's complete. So an unfinished symphony is such a great piece, but it's unfinished. And maybe that's what life is about too. Maybe that's the message God wants to give us through the Torah with Moses, that it's better to live in such a way so that you leave something open. You're not complete. You're not finished. You're not done yet. And that Moses at that point also is he leaves us, but he didn't finish what he wanted to see. We can't have everything in life that we want, and I don't know if anybody who gets everything they want in life either. So
I can imagine that.
Anyway, but you make a good point there, Kathy. Could be.
And you're talking, this is Jack Katz, and talking about Saul, there's one place where you make me think he was his old self, where he didn't want the cruelty of killing that king. He let him live. And then the other side of him is where he tries to kill David in order to protect his being king. So it's like a little bit of both with him, isn't it? I mean, where his kindness overruled, where he didn't want to kill that king.
Well, in this case, this kindness was a mistake.
Right.
A very serious mistake.
But you can't really say that in some ways, because I'm thinking because of Haman, it brought the Jews together, and you don't know what would have happened if we hadn't had Haman. He might have brought the Jews together more, and it might have been in the long run a more positive thing for us than just negative, because the Jews were all saved behind Esther and Mordecai. So I don't see it as a total negative.
Jack,
that Haman came.
Well, who needs someone who hates you to bring,
Jack, I disagree also. I was always taught, this is Lisa Hennig, I was always taught that the most evil people all descended from that king. Okay, and I remember I thought it was like one of his wives, of course, who was spared, but that Hitler, anyone else whoever supposedly is in that same line. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think we have the DNA to prove that Hitler was a descendant of Haman, but that's the kind of thing we were taught in Hebrew school.
Yeah. And but anyway, it's true. He did show compassion to that person. That was part of him. But he should have been, I guess, stronger than that. But
went against God's word only, right? That was not God's directive was to kill him.
Yeah, it was to kill Amalek. Yeah.
Eric Fendler, I hope you can hear me okay. Am I loud enough?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, first of all, thanks for the series of talks. I'm sitting here with my significant other, Raya, who of course grew up in Israel, and I call her Dr. Rabbi Reverend Professor because she's so knowledgeable about Bible and the archaeology. So we've really enjoyed the talks. She's putting in a bid for a little more information about archaeological discoveries involving City of David, Jerusalem, things that have been uncovering evidence of Israelite presence. As for a future Sunday.
The City of David is the most excavated site in the world. The most excavated site. And they keep going down more and more and more. And the further down you get, the more you get to the Jewish base. Right. So it's, they just keep finding all the time.
Sure. Whatever
new
you
things
think about it in a future session would be great. The second item, I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to try and share my screen because you need an audio visual helper. And I'm gonna try just real quickly to share my screen with some pictures of Shem. All right, so let me see if I can do it.
Okay. Let's see. We started.
Are you getting it? Are you getting any pictures of BiblePlaces.com?
Yes.
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 we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's you and I talk. If you have pictures you want to share, I can share and you can talk. And that's
Oh.
it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. All right. I could just, what's your email?
Eric.fendler@gmail. There's a message from me somewhere in your overflowing inbox. Eric.fendler@gmail.
That's good. That's a good idea. Because I had a picture of a model of the Mishkan, which has been reconstructed in Timnah, actually, according to the dimensions and so on, which I wanted to show. And I wanted to, show the map of Yerushalayim, the city itself, the old city, and then also I had a picture which I had from the model at the Israel Museum. There's a wonderful model of the Second Temple period, but that shows you the size of Ir David, the city of David, how small it really is. I wanted to show the site where Saul made his capital, which is the place where King Hussein of Jordan tried in 1964. They can't excavate that site because the King of Jordan in 1964 was going to build a palace there. The whole area was part of Jordan at the time. After 1948, it was part of Jordan, and he was going to build a summer palace there. The outline is there, and he was a young man. His father, Abdullah, was assassinated in 1950-51 while he was walking up the steps at the Al-Aqsa Mosque by another Arab, and he became the king at the age of 18. So he was a young man. At the time, NASA was the respected leader of the Arab world, and Israel tried very hard to try to make sure he would not enter the war in 1967. All kinds of unquiet stuff was going on. He met with NASA, and NASA promised him all kinds of stuff. We're going to defeat them. All the Arab nations are together. We're going to defeat the Israelis now. This is our time, and you're going to get this and this and this and this. So he decided he got suckered into it, and so he lost it. But nobody touches that place. It's just a shell. It's just a shell. It's called Tel Al-Ful. If you want to look it up on the internet, Tel Al-Ful, and you'll see the shell of the palace that he was building for himself, which was the city of Shaul, Giva, that Shaul was built, but they can't excavate it. Israel doesn't do anything there, not to create any diplomatic blow up and problem. And out of respect to the area, it just left. And you just see a building, a shell of a building that would have been a palace. Okay. I want to show that picture as well.
Well, Rabbi, this is my